They say certain moments follow you forever. They cling like shadows, silent yet ever present. It's been 2 years since that day, 2 years since everything changed. It was meant to be simple, a beach outing with my son Leonard. My husband Phoenix couldn't join us. He never could. Work always came first, and I had grown accustomed to that, to being on my own. But that day didn't feel right, not then and not now. We laid out the towels. The sun was warm, maybe too warm. I stretched out, trying to escape the world's constant noise for once. I asked Leonard to help apply some oil to my back. I didn't think twice about it. He's my son, my child. Why would I? At first, it was nothing, just his hands, just assistance. But then I felt it. I felt him hesitate, linger, lower and lower, and I didn't stop him. Why didn't I stop him? You think you know yourself, you think you understand your family, but there's always one moment, a single instant, that has the power to unravel everything. For me, it was that day on the beach. And I have never been the same. Phoenix and I had been married for over 15 years. To anyone looking from the outside, we were the ideal couple. A lovely home, well-behaved kids, and a stable life. But you don't notice the fractures until you're living within those walls. You don't feel the void unless you're the one enduring it. Phoenix's career was his universe for years, late nights, weekends, holidays. I used to convince myself he did it for us, that the overtime and the dedication were all for the future he was building for our family. But after a while, that belief starts to crumble. What's the point of a home if no one is ever in it? I became invisible to him. When he was home, he barely noticed me. He stopped asking about my feelings, my wants, or my needs. Our conversations were short, practical exchanges about bills, groceries, or the kids. He adored Leonard and his younger sister Isa, but even with them, his presence felt like a shadow. He was there, but not really. I used to sit across the table from him, wondering if he even saw me anymore. That morning, I remember standing in the kitchen as Phoenix rushed out the door. He grabbed his briefcase, kissed Isa on the head, and gave me a fleeting glance. Sorry? Freya, I can't make it today. Something came up at work. I didn't argue. I just nodded like I always did. My throat felt tight, but I reassured myself it was fine. Leonard and I could go on our own. Leonard was 16 then, tall, lanky, with his father's brown eyes but a gentler face. He didn't say much, not even when I told him it'd just be the two of us. Maybe he had grown used to his dad's absences, too. He simply shrugged, grabbed the bags, and followed me to the car. On the drive, I watched him in the passenger seat, earbuds in, staring out the window, the way teenagers always do. I couldn't help but smile. He was growing up so quickly, and sometimes I worried I'd blink and lose him too. The drive to the beach felt endless. My thoughts drifted, as they often did, to Phoenix. I thought about the things we used to do together, movie nights, long walks, aimless road trips just for fun. I remembered the way he used to touch me, how his eyes lit up when he looked at me. I hadn't felt that in years. I hadn't felt anything in years. I was so tired of being unseen. When we finally arrived, Leonard helped me carry the bags to a quiet spot near the water. I spread out the towels while he set up the umbrella. For some reason, I felt the urge to talk to him. Maybe it was because he was the only one there. Maybe I just needed someone to hear me. It's nice to get out, don't you think? I asked, trying to sound upbeat. He nodded, brushing his hair back with his hand. Yeah, Mom, it's nice. I lay down on the towel, letting the sun's warmth seep into my skin. For a while, I didn't move, allowing myself to be still, like I was trying to shed the weight of the past few years, even if only for a moment. Then I remembered the oil. I sat up and turned to Leonard. Can you help me rub this on my back? I asked. I can't reach. He hesitated briefly before taking the bottle from my hand. I laid face down on the towel and waited. His first touch was tentative, almost awkward, like he was afraid of hurting me. I smiled to myself, reminded of when he was little, holding my hand to cross the street. His hands had been so small back then. You can press a little harder, I told him softly. It's okay. He followed my instruction, his hands growing steadier as he worked the oil over my shoulders and down my back. I closed my eyes, focusing on the warmth and rhythm of his touch. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to enjoy it. It had been so long since anyone had touched me, and the realization hit me harder than I wanted to admit. But then, I felt his hands drift downward, carefully tracing the curve of my back. My breath hitched, caught in my throat, and I parted my lips to speak, but no words came out. My mind raced, yet I stayed quiet. I convinced myself it was all right, that he was merely assisting me, that I was imagining things, but deep down I knew I wasn't. His hands hesitated, lingering near the edge of where my towel ended. I could sense his uncertainty, and I felt my own. Instead of stopping him, I whispered, "It's okay. You can massage there too." The words hung heavy in the air like something toxic, and the moment they left my mouth, I realized I couldn't take them back. Leonard didn't respond. He didn't stop either. I clenched my eyes shut and felt his hands move lower than they should have gone. My heart hammered so loudly I thought he might hear it. I wanted to move, to sit up, to tell him to stop, but I didn't. I couldn't. I let it happen. Even now, I don't fully understand why. Perhaps it was the loneliness. Perhaps I was desperate to feel desired, even in a way that felt wrong. Or maybe I had just stopped caring. That day on the beach, something inside me shattered, and I knew life would never be the same again. If you've made it this far into the story, thank you for staying with me. I understand this isn't easy to hear, and I truly appreciate you listening. If you find this story meaningful or think someone else might relate to it, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe. Your support means everything. It reminds me I'm not entirely alone in this. Let's get back to it. After that day at the beach, something shifted. I couldn't ignore it. What I felt, what I saw, and the way Leonard looked at me afterward. It wasn't just a fleeting glance or a passing moment. It was constant. Each time I caught his gaze, there was something different in it. Something I didn't want to acknowledge, but couldn't unsee. I tried to push it away. When we got home that evening, I forced myself to act normal. I prepared dinner, asked Leonard about school, and folded laundry late into the night, my hands trembling. My mind replayed every detail. His hands, his lingering touch, the tension coursing through my body. I loathed myself for feeling this way, and I resented him for making me see myself like this, about my own son. Phoenix, as usual, noticed nothing. He arrived home late, his tie loosened, exhaustion etched on his face. He kissed my cheek out of habit, a faint echo of what once had been. "Tough day?" I asked, hoping to start a conversation. He grunted, nodded, and drifted to the living room. His presence felt like an afterthought. And me? I felt invisible again. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Phoenix snored softly beside me. The house was silent, but my thoughts were deafening. I couldn't stop thinking about Leonard, about his hands and the look in his eyes. I knew it was wrong. I knew I had to end it before it went any further. But there was another part of me, something dark, something desperate, that clung to the attention, the touch, the sense of being seen. The days passed, and Leonard didn't say a word, yet his silence was deafening. He didn't avoid me, not exactly. Instead, he seemed closer. I'd catch him watching me as I cooked, cleaned, or sat alone on the couch at night, and I let it happen. I didn't stop him. I didn't stop myself. The following weekend, the heat returned, stifling the house. Phoenix was away, working a last-minute shift, leaving me and Leonard alone again. I suggested going back to the beach, just the two of us. I don't know why. Maybe I thought the open air would clear my head. Maybe I wanted to test myself, to see if I could bury the feelings. The drive was quiet. Leonard didn't wear his earbuds this time. He sat gazing out the window, his knee bouncing nervously. I wanted to break the silence, but each time I tried to speak, the words wouldn't come. When we reached the beach, it was nearly deserted. The water shimmered, a brilliant shade of blue, and the wind brushed against my face. We spread out the towels, just as before, and Leonard helped me set up. This time, I didn't ask him to rub oil on my back. I couldn't. Instead, I lay there with my eyes shut, pretending everything was fine. But even with my eyes closed, I could feel his gaze on me. The true breaking point, however, came later that afternoon. We had decided to rinse off at the beach showers before heading back home. It was meant to be quick, a simple way to remove the sand from our skin. But something occurred in that moment, something I still struggle to comprehend. When we arrived at the showers, Leonard stepped under the stream of water first, letting it cascade over his back. I lingered to the side, observing him briefly before joining. For reasons I can't fully explain, I removed my outerwear and stepped beside him, feeling the cool water against my skin. Leonard turned to look at me, surprised. I couldn't decipher his expression. Was it shock, confusion, or something deeper? He remained silent. I glanced his way, truly taking him in for a moment, and said, "You should take off your shorts too. You need a proper rinse." I'm not sure why I said it. Maybe I wanted to assert control, to test boundaries, his and mine. He hesitated briefly but complied, sliding them off. There we stood, alone together, with water pouring down, cleansing everything except the emotions that surged between us. I turned my back to him and softly asked, "Help me with my back." He did, his hands moving gently, just as they had before. Yet, I couldn't ignore the tension, tangible, palpable in both of us. When his hands brushed my waist, I froze. The air grew heavy, the sound of rushing water muffling everything else. I could have walked away, could have stopped it, but instead I leaned back closer to him, guiding his hands to my chest. And when I did, he didn't pull away. What followed is beyond explanation, a haze of need, loneliness, and a nameless emotion I dare not identify. It wasn't tender or slow, it was urgent, raw, and undeniably wrong. Yet I couldn't stop it. I didn't want to. When it ended, we stood in silence, water still cascading over us, washing away every trace except the truth. He held me then, in a way no one had in years, and I let him. We didn't speak as we dried off, packed up, and returned to the car. The silence weighed heavily on us. I stole glances at Leonard, his flushed face, stiff movements. I knew we had crossed an irreversible line. But for the first time in years, I felt alive. The drive home began in silence. The car felt oppressive, like the air itself was pressing down on us. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I tried to focus on the road, but my thoughts spun out of control. I could still feel him, his hands, his presence, the weight of everything we had done. Leonard finally broke the silence. "Mom," he said, his voice low and uncertain. I didn't turn to look at him. I couldn't. But I heard him. What just happened back there?" My heart skipped a beat. For a fleeting moment, I considered feigning ignorance, changing the subject. But there was no use pretending anymore. Not after what had happened. I exhaled shakily and replied, "I don't know." It was the truth, or the closest I could get to it. All I knew was that everything between us had shifted irreparably. When we reached the driveway, I turned off the car, but neither of us moved. Leonard finally turned to face me. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that frightened me. Not confusion, guilt, or shame. It was longing. "How long have you felt this way?" he asked, his words chilling me. I had been asking myself the same question. Meeting his gaze, I admitted, "I don't know. Maybe longer than I'd like to admit." Silence enveloped us again. I assumed we'd go inside, pretend nothing had happened, and move on. But Leonard had other plans. Before I could open the door, he leaned in and kissed me. It was tentative at first, as if he feared I'd recoil. But I didn't. I let him, and then I kissed him back. What followed was an uncontrollable blur, a culmination of years of loneliness, neglect, and the way Leonard looked at me, as if I mattered in a way I hadn't for so long. Right there, outside our home, I let it happen. Leonard held me, his hands moving over me with a familiarity that felt both wrong and inevitable. I felt truly alive, desired, noticed, and understood, for the first time in years. Nothing else mattered. I couldn't tell how long we stayed there, intertwined, but eventually we made our way inside. The walk to the door is mostly a haze now. All I recall is the sensation of his hand in mine and the charged silence between us, crackling like electricity. We didn't speak. Words weren't necessary. Once inside, everything intensified. It was as though we had been holding ourselves back for ages, and now the floodgates had finally burst. The following days were a blur. Leonard stayed close, finding subtle excuses to touch me or catch my gaze when no one else was watching. I kept telling myself to stop, to pull away, to end this, whatever it was. But every time I looked at him, I saw the same desolation I felt, a mirror reflecting the same ache, the same hollowness, and I couldn't turn away. I didn't want to. At night, lying in bed beside Phoenix, I'd stare at the ceiling, listening to his steady breaths, while my thoughts strayed to Leonard. I'd recall the way his touch ignited something in me, something I thought long dead, and then guilt would coil tightly in my chest like a serpent. I knew it couldn't last. I knew it was wrong, but stopping felt impossible. The tension between us grew unbearable until it finally erupted. Late one evening, Phoenix was working late, Isa was asleep, and Leonard and I were alone in the kitchen. I busied myself with washing dishes, trying to distract my mind when I felt him behind me. I turned, and there he was, looking at me with the same intensity he had on the beach. "Leonard," I whispered, my voice trembling, a warning. But he didn't stop. He stepped closer until I could feel the warmth of his breath on my neck. "I can't stop thinking about you," he murmured. I froze. My heart thundered in my chest. I wanted to tell him to leave, to go back to his room, to leave me alone. But instead, I met his gaze and said the one thing I shouldn't have. "I can't stop either." And that was it. That was the moment everything shattered. Leonard kissed me again, this time with urgency, and I kissed him back. I didn't care that it was wrong. I didn't care about Phoenix, Isa, or the life we had built. All I cared about was Leonard, the only person who had made me feel significant in years. Since that day on the beach, nothing has returned to normal. Perhaps it never will. Leonard and I crossed a boundary that can never be erased. What began as a fleeting moment has spiraled into something uncontrollable. The guilt is ever present, heavy and unrelenting, but it doesn't stop me. That frightens me the most. I look at my husband, Phoenix, and my daughter, Isa, every day, wondering how they don't see the fractures spreading through our family. Are they too engrossed in their own lives to notice? Or have I become adept at concealing the truth? Deep down, I know this can't continue. Secrets have a way of surfacing, and when they do, the fallout will be catastrophic. I've tried to stop. I've told myself again and again that this is wrong, that Leonard deserves better, that I deserve better. Yet every time he touches me, every time he looks at me like I'm his entire world, I lose myself. He makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years, perhaps ever. And that's the truth I must carry. I don't know how to repair this. I don't even know if it's possible. That's why I'm sharing my story with you. Maybe someone out there has an answer, a perspective I've overlooked. Perhaps you can help me find a way out before it's too late. If you've been in a situation like this or know someone who has, please share your thoughts. And if nothing else, let this serve as a cautionary tale. Loneliness can lead you down roads you never imagined. Don't let yourself lose your way as I have. Thank you for listening. Sometimes the deepest betrayals are the ones we commit against ourselves.